Everyone, welcome to the first lecture. This one's going to be on the agricultural revolution. Because there's no shortage of ignorance everywhere we go, I'd like to start at the very beginning, which is the Big Bang, 4.5 billion years ago. If you think about the idea that there was nothing and then all of a sudden this Big Bang happens and the Earth is created along with our solar system. But what I think is really fascinating is that there's about a billion years go by before there's any life at all on the planet. And it starts with what's sometimes referred to as primordial ooze, single cell life. And single cell life is here for about 3 billion years before it evolves to multi-cell life. That multi-cell life starts to develop as well, and it becomes invertebrates like jellyfish, which are very interesting creatures. There's a lot of really cool documentaries. I recommend you watch one because we still don't even really understand half of what they do. But they start to evolve, and about a million years later we get like worms, and earthworms in particularly are interesting because they eat and defecate from different parts of their body, and so then that's an evolutionary process. Another 150 million years go by and we start to evolve. We see the one of the ones that's most exciting is about 400 million years ago we get sharks. And what's really cool about that apex predator is how very similar the sharks today are to that ancestor. Like, it reached perfection about 400 million years ago. And then about 250 million years ago is the age of all those dinosaurs, which apparently if you're in third grade, everybody's supposed to know the name of every single dinosaur that exists because, Oh, and it's also very curious, don't you think, that dinosaurs are supposed to be toys that are for boys? I always thought that was odd. And what's interesting with this age of the dinosaurs is that about 65 million years ago, we have an extinction level event that's called the Chicxulub impact. A giant asteroid comes down and lands into the shallow waters of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, like where Cancun is. Back then, the globe was different. That was underwater, all that land. So it was shallow. The fact that it was so shallow means that the tsunami wave that came out of it wasn't that big. It wasn't that big, and it still reached all the way to the Grand Canyon. So we can imagine if it had hit in like the depths of the oceans. But that extinction level event caused global fires, soot covered the sky, it created a global winter, it killed about 80% of the species that existed. Extinction level event. But nature is fascinating. A few million years go by and life starts to regenerate itself, and what we do at this point is that we get what we refer to now the age of the mammals, and that's where we come into the picture. About 50 million years ago, we get these creatures that are known as the hominoids. It's somewhat of an evolutionary process from the primates, very intelligent primates. And so the distinctions that start to happen, for one, is that the head starts to sit on the top of the spine. And so when that happens, it sort of opens up the vocal cords, so you have more range of sounds, like wah, wah, rah, nah, nah, and more facial expression. So all that really helps the evolutionary process of communication, because if you have more sounds and more things you can do with your mouth, so you can sort of see as people are talking to you, you start to get a little bit more creative in the way that you interact with each other. Also, this movement allows for hand-eye coordination at a more extreme level, and of using tools. All kinds of animals use tools. You can see like videos of like an otter that grabs a rock to like break open a little shell so it could eat the shellfish that it finds, or a bird uses a stick to get something out, or animals use tools. So the more advanced your hand-eye coordination is, or the use of your hands, the more advanced your tool usage can be at this point. Then about 300,000 years ago, we find these remains that we refer to as the Neanderthals because of the area where we found them, somewhere around Germany. And it was this particular site that I want to talk about. It was a grave site of what we know was the body of a little boy. And it was prepared. It was like wrapped up, and some bones were laid on top of it to make like a little shelter for the body. And so then I like to always ask the question, what does it mean that they buried their dead? What would that say about them? And usually the answer, this is where we would participate in the classroom, and then usually what people always say is stuff like, oh, it means that they loved one another, it means they cared for each other, it means they had community, it means that they had beliefs. And I was like, what kind of beliefs? And they're like, oh, spiritual beliefs. I was like, well, what does that mean if they had spiritual beliefs? Well, if they're burying their dead, it must mean that maybe they believed in an afterlife. I was like, oh, so you think they believed in an afterlife? Like, maybe they believed in God. I was like, yeah, maybe they did, if they buried their dead. Maybe it means all their things. And then this is where I like to tell a little story, which is that as we see the evolutionary process after that extinction level event of the rise of the mammals, we aren't the only mammals that are evolving. All the mammals are evolving and growing and learning and developing communal relationships with each other and societies. At this very moment, you could get a master's degree in primate anthropology, which is basically studying the cultural formations of different primate groups, which means culture, like the way you deal with a birth in the community or a death or, courtships or sharing food. Like, these are cultural practices, and different primates have different kinds of cultural practices, and you could get your master's degree studying that. So the idea that animals are also evolving, and we are animals, so all mammals. And so I like to talk about how the elephants have family units and raise their youngs together, and that elephants have a graveyard. You ever see the movie The Lion King, where little Simba's running through those bones? That's an elephant graveyard. There is a place when an elephant knows it's dying, it walks itself to the graveyard and it dies there, and the elephants go and visit their family members in the graveyard, and they touch the bones with their trunks, and they cry. They demonstrate emotional capacity. So what does that say about the elephants? That they have a gravesite for their dead, that they love each other, that they have family, that they have community. Maybe it means that they have a spiritual awareness. Maybe we don't speak to elephants, so we don't know. Maybe they believe in an afterlife. Maybe they believe in a God. So if we see this in our own ancestral, and we see this recognition of the spark of life, we should also recognize it in the other animals as they exist. So our ancestors, the Neanderthals, start to develop, and we evolve towards the Cro-Magnon. This is usually what we refer to as the caveman, because so many of our cave paintings are from this era. Or if you see those Geico commercials, so easy, a caveman can do it. That's the Cro-Magnon that is being depicted there. And this evolutionary process, I like to always point out that we have found remains of dogs living alongside these people, not really domesticated, but just more like a companionship thing. Like, together they would hunt and gather. So this is all hunt and gathering. So as that evolutionary process happens about 50,000 years ago, we get Homo sapiens, which would be us. We consider this to be a more intelligent creature. It's important to note that there are many species of hominoids, us being one of them, and that they were on the earth, extinct now, but they were on the earth for a much longer time than even we've currently been on the earth. So it's just it's interesting to sort of take note of that. So one of the things I like to point out about this era is that in the cave paintings that we have found, there are numerous recordings of goddess worship. That whenever there is an image of God, of a deity, of like, this is what we worship, it's the female form. It's either an animal with a vagina or the sculpture of a woman, and she usually has big breasts and thighs, and and then I always ask, like, why is she like this Mabamba mama, and it's like, oh, it's because she was gonna survive childbirth. And so then what we're worshiping actually is life. And so the idea that God was represented with this image of the giver of life, and this is across the globe, these are the images that we find of like what it was that was representation for God. Sometimes just the vagina is just carved into the wall. There's not even a body. It's just like, here, I'm going to carve a vagina into the side of this wall. And there's like so many records of this. It's pretty exciting to find, if you start to look it up. That's a really interesting point to sort of show. And then what we also know is that they lived in small groups. And so if you think about the way to live in smaller societies, who's going to be the leader in the small group? It's not because you're strong with muscle. I have muscle, I rule. It's like, no, usually it's because you're the one who's a really good communicator. You're the one that knows how to hold the community together. You're the smart one. You're the one that actually is the best at problem solving. And that's not really if you're a man or a woman. That's just pretty much if you have the capabilities, and also that you're living to be old. So age had a lot to do with leadership, and it wasn't really based on, physical strength so much. You need physical strength to make tasks happen, like building and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily you look at physical strength to be your leader. And so what we're looking at this point is that everybody lives communally. Leadership is based on merit, and the worship of God is worshiping the female form.